On the night of April 1st, 1922, 6 people tragically lost their lives. 100 years later, this case is still hotly debated as the greatest German mystery of all time. The Hinterkaifeck farm was built around 1863 northeast of Schrobenhausen in Bavaria. In 1922, the farm consisted of a residential and stable building and a larger barn wing. The name was not a place name but an official house name, as the site lay behind the village of Kaifeck. The people who lived on the farm were the Gruber family, consisting of 63-year-old Andreas, 72-year-old Cecilia, their 35-year-old daughter Victoria, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Josef. The family was described by the townspeople as reclusive and solitary. Some even said that the Gruber family was despised because they were stingy and sold their products for extortionate prices. Despite this, the family helped other farms with their work, and they themselves had also employed some maids and harvest helpers. The family lived their seemingly normal life on their small compound, but there was also a very dark side that many did not know about. The father, Andreas, abused his daughter Victoria since her 16th birthday. Victoria lived on the farm after her husband lost his life in the war. In 1915, both Andreas and Victoria were sentenced to jail for the forbidden act between father and daughter. Andreas received 1 year in prison and Victoria 1 month. To this day, it is not known whether these acts were voluntary or not. However, these acts continued after the prison sentence until 1922. In March 1922, some strange things were to happen around the farm that might later become important. For example, a Munich newspaper was found very close to the farm, which was not sold in this region. Andreas Gruber first thought that the postman had lost it, but after some investigation it became clear that nobody in the area had ordered this newspaper. Then, a few days later, he saw footprints in the snow leading to the farm, but not leading away from it. There was also a complaint that the front door key was missing. In the farm's motor cabin, someone had broken the padlock and untied a cow. According to their own statement, nobody from the family was responsible for it. It almost seemed as if someone was secretly living on the farm and playing a nasty game with the family. This suspicion only became more concrete when the Gruber family noticed a man standing in the woods watching them. The man allegedly had a mustache and was secretly watching both family and employees. During the night, the family heard footsteps in the attic. When Andreas went to check, no one was to be found. Despite all these strange incidents, Andreas refused to accept help from the police or from neighbors. March 31st, 1922. Maria Baumgartner arrives at the farm in the afternoon. She was supposed to be the new maid on the farm. She was accompanied to the farm by her sister, who left shortly afterwards. What happened after that cannot be said exactly even 100 years later. Someone took the lives of the entire Gruber family and the maid Maria Baumgartner that night. The only thing that is certain is that Victoria, Cecilia, Andreas and the 7-year-old Cecilia were beaten to death with a hoe near the transition door from the stable to the barn. Afterwards, the perpetrator or perpetrators went into the living area where Maria Baumgartner was beaten to death. After that, little Josef lost his life. 4 days passed in which the perpetrator or the perpetrators must have stayed in the house. The cattle continued to be fed and the cows were milked. The family's bread supply was eaten during these 4 days and someone had freshly cut the meat from the pantry. On April 1st, 1922, 1 day after the crime, the coffee sellers Hans and Eduard Shirovsky arrived at the farm because they wanted to take an order. They knocked on doors and windows, but no one responded, so they went around the yard. There, they saw that the gate to the engine house was open. But as they did not expect anything bad, they left the farm again. In the following days, teachers noted that Cecilia was absent without excuse. On April 2nd, there was no sign of the Gruber family at the Sunday service, something they never missed. On April 3rd, the postman also noticed that no one was on the farm. Then, on April 4th, the mechanic Albert Hofner arrived at Hinterkaifeck because he had promised to take care of a motor of the cutting machine. He too noted that no one was on the farm, but he still repaired the motor. He noticed that the cows were screaming and the dog was barking loudly. He also noticed that the barn door was open. Back in the village of Gröbern, he then met the daughters of the local leader Lorenz Schlittenbauer and told them about the emptiness at Hinterkaifeck. The local leader then sent his 2 sons to the farm who found no one there, so he finally went there himself. A report in the Salzburger Wacht of April 6, 1922 then wrote the following about that day. In the wasteland of Hinterkaifeck, parish of Wangen, about 900 meters from the village of Gröbern, all the inhabitants, the couple Andreas and Cecile Gruber, who were about 70 years old, their widowed daughter Victoria, the 9-year-old girl, and the 2.5-year-old son of the daughter and the 45-year-old maid Maria Baumgartner, were found murdered on Monday evening. They had all been beaten to death. The perpetrators had apparently used a so-called cross-hoe as a weapon. The remains of the Gruber couple, the daughter and the girl Cecile, lay in the threshing floor next to the stable. The remains of the son Josef in the baby carriage in the bedroom, of the 2 old people, and the remains of the maid in the chamber. The cattle in the stable had been let loose, all the containers in the house had been ransacked. What was robbed is not yet known. The jewelry is said to have been found. Mr. and Mrs. Gruber were regarded in the area as special people. They lived a very secluded life and, according to the neighbors, had about 100,000 marks in paper money, gold and silver money, and bonds from various banks in the house. The storage of money in the house seems to have been the incentive for this horrible crime. The crime had been committed in the evening before or in the night of April 1st. The maid had only started working 1 day before the crime and the daughter's husband had been killed in the war. There is still no trace of the perpetrators. Around 6 p.m. on April 4th, the police officers arrived at the scene. A large number of onlookers had already arrived in Hinterkaifeck, so the officers' first task was to remove these people before they could contaminate the scene. 6 officers were also dispatched to Hinterkaifeck from Munich, 70 kilometers away, after they received the report at around 6:15 p.m. The officers arrived on the scene at 1:30 a.m. However, as it was already pitch dark at that time, a crime scene inspection was postponed until 5:30 in the morning. Then, in the early morning, together with the judicial commission, they systematically examined the premises. In the attic, they then saw that the floor was covered in hay. Someone had tried to muffle his footsteps. The same footsteps that Andreas Gruber had heard days before. In addition, some roof tiles had been removed so that from certain points they could see all over the farm. There were also 2 hollows in a haystack, which were evidence that people had been hiding there. At first the police assumed that it must have been a robbery. But since the police could not determine exactly how much money was missing, they could not really assume that it was a robbery. So they started to investigate in all possible directions. Peddlers and people with a criminal record in the area were brought into the police's focus. The mechanic who had repaired the engine was never questioned. The police later admitted that they had forgotten about him, although he might have been an important witness. It is also interesting to note that the murder weapon was not found until a year later. There were no fingerprints on it, but there was remains of human hair on it. On April 8, 1922, a reward of 100,000 marks was issued. Converted to today's values, that would be just under 5,000 euros. When this became known, an extremely large number of suspects were named. Let's take a look at the most important suspects. In the complete history of the case, there were close to 100 suspects. No charges were ever brought in any of them. Suspect 1. Karl Gabriel. Karl Gabriel was the husband of Victoria. He was supposed to have been killed in the First World War, but there were some people who doubted this. He faked his death because he knew that Josef was the child of Victoria and her father. As revenge, he then took the life of the entire family. His comrades confirmed that they had seen him fall, but there were some eyewitnesses' accounts that said that they had met Karl. After the Second World War had ended, some German soldiers claimed that a Soviet soldier with a Bavarian dialect had claimed that he had been the perpetrator of Hinterkaifeck. We don't know how much truth was behind this story. However, all witnesses said that Karl had said before and after the crime that he wanted to escape to Russia. Suspect 2. Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Lorenz Schlittenbauer was a local leader at the time. He was already considered one of the main suspects at that time. He had an affair with Victoria Gabriel for some time, which is why he was also considered to be Josef's potential father. His behavior when the family was found was also highly suspicious. When his two sons found the family's remains with him, he went further into the house alone, and his sons noticed that he knew his way around extremely well. He went straight to the front door and unlocked it. This was extremely strange because the very key he used to open the door was the one the family had lost. According to Lorenz, the key was already in the door, but no one except him had seen it. He also lived only 300 meters away from the farm. He was also once caught by a resident of the village standing at the cellar door of the farm years after the crime, claiming that the remains could not be buried because the ground was too hard. Neither the police nor any other witnesses had ever made such a statement. He died in 1941. Suspect 3. Josef Bertel. Josef Bertel was a baker from a nearby village who was considered by many to be mentally ill. In 1921 he escaped from a sanitarium and many were sure that he was the culprit. The reasoning was, such an act can only be committed by a mental patient. Despite an arrest warrant, Josef Bertel was never seen again after his escape. Suspect 4. Gump brothers. Adolf Gump is said to have previously taken the life of over 9 farmers with 3 other men. Therefore, there was already a warrant for his arrest at the time of the crime. His brother Anton was also suspected of having helped in the crime. In 1951, Anton was arrested. His brother had already died in 1944. Since nothing could be proven, he was released and the case against him was dropped in 1954. Suspect 5. Karl and Andreas Schreier. A few months after the crime, the brothers Andreas and Karl Schreier were arrested. Both were known to be violent in their homeland and many feared them. At the time of the crime, they were near the farm as they were transporting wood. However, as they had an alibi for the crime, they were let go. This did not change the fact that people still suspected them. The reason for this was that in 1971 a letter was written in which a woman claimed that the 2 brothers had committed the crime. Andreas Schreier would have said that he had lost his pocket knife during the crime. In fact, such a pocket knife was found in the yard and it had never been made public before that this knife even existed. However, a maid from the farm said that the knife had been on the farm before the crime. Suspect 6. Peter Weber. Peter Weber was suspected by a work colleague. Together they worked as laborers. During their work, Peter Weber kept talking about a remote farm where a married couple would live with their children. Peter also knew about the daughter's relationship with her father. One time Peter Weber suggested to kill Andreas Gruber to get his money. Suspect 7. Bichler brothers and Georg Siegel. A maid who worked on the farm in 1921 suspected the brothers Anton and Karl Bichler. Anton had helped on the farm before and therefore knew the layout of the farm. He was often caught speaking badly about the Gruber family. Once he even said that the family should be beaten to death. Then, one night, the maid saw Anton talking to his brother Karl in the dark. Georg Siegel was also an employee of the farm who knew about the family's wealth, which is why the maid believed that the 3 of them had taken the family's life. The murder weapon had also been carved by Georg Siegel, which was further evidence of his guilt. Suspect 8. Thaler brothers. The same maid who had already suspected the Bichler brothers also suspected the Thaler brothers. The 2 brothers had already committed several burglaries before Hinterkaifeck. In addition, Josef Thaler often stood in front of the maid's window at night and watched her. Josef also claimed that he knew exactly which member of the family slept in which room and where they kept the money at night. Since all this scared the maid very much, she quit 4 weeks later. Suspect 9. Josef Pfleger. The last suspect on this list was Josef Pfleger. In 1935, he allegedly made a confession in front of his daughter. According to his statement, he and an accomplice had broken into the stable in Hinterkaifeck. This caused the cattle to become restless, which is why Andreas Gruber came over to have a look. In the process, he was beaten to death by the two men with a hoe. They then forced their way into the house, where they killed the maid before exterminating the rest of the family. Josef Pfleger was released after a few days, and he said that his daughter was a liar. And these were all the important suspects in the case. With each suspect, there's little evidence that speaks for or against them as a perpetrator. Who do you think is the most likely suspect? The family was buried without skulls. The heads of the family were kept in a Kurt house, which was destroyed in the Second World War. The farm was also demolished in 1923, and today all you can see there is a plaque. On Instagram, I was sent these photos showing what you can still see today. It is no secret that the police had made many mistakes in the investigation. For example, the original report said that the family were lured to the barn because of the loud noises. However, experiments afterwards revealed that a person's screams could not be heard in the living area. This means that they could not be lured by screams. So what was the reason why they were in the barn? Also, only 5 photographs were taken of the whole crime scene. Fingerprints were not secured. The day after the crime, an unknown man was seen burning something in the family's oven. According to the witness, it stank terribly. The police did not discover it necessary to follow up this tip-off, which is why neither the remains in the oven nor any other clues were collected in this regard. There were also several witnesses who said that doors were suddenly locked when they were in the yard. This happened after the crime and before the family was discovered. This means that the perpetrators were around when the police arrived and the police had failed to look for them. Also, the background of the maid Maria Baumgartner was never investigated. The crime happened only a few hours after she arrived at the farm. Did she possibly have a connection to the perpetrator? As already mentioned, the murder weapon was not found until a year later, but a bloody crucifix was already found during the first investigation. After the murder weapon was found, however, the crucifix was never mentioned again. In summary, Hinterkaifeck is a prime example of bad police work. Many clues were never followed up, traces were not secured, and due to the fact that more than 100 people were accused, the police at some point simply lost the overview. Was it because of the times? Was it the bad reputation of the family? Today the police assume that the perpetrator will probably never be found. Genetic tests of the descendants would be useless because too few traces were secured. One last interesting fact about this case. The police were 100% sure at the time who the perpetrator was, but they never published the name out of respect and moral consideration for the descendants. So, what do you believe? What happened in Hinterkaifeck? Who had a motive? Good night and stay safe.